beneath the unyielding gaze of the mountain's throat, where stone whispered secrets to the void, Nisa Korin fell into the ancient hunger. The air in the temple of the living stone always carried the scent of damp earth and incense, a veil that softened the edges of devotion. But on this night, as the high priests chanted their solemn rites under the vaulted ceilings etched with veins of quartz that gleamed like frozen lightning, the air thickened with something sharper. Fear, raw and metallic, tasting of blood yet to be spilled. Nisa stood at the heart of the sanctum, her bare feet pressing into the cool flagstones that pulsed faintly, as if the mountain itself breathed beneath her. At 19, she had known no other life than this. The Omega's quiet service, her body a vessel for the sacred, her spirit bent to the will of the Stone Mother. Omegas like her were the temple's unseen threads, weaving the rituals that bound the world above to the labyrinthine depths below. She had lit candles in the alcoves, her hands steady despite the tremor of uncertainty that sometimes stirred in her chest. She had knelt in prayer, offering whispers for the warriors who vanished into the mountain's maw. But never had she imagined her own name echoing in the selection rite. The high priest, Elder Thorn, his face a map of scars from visions long past, raised the obsidian chalice. Its rim caught the torchlight, flickering like distant stars swallowed by night. "The labyrinth stirs," he intoned, his voice a rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. "It hungers for balance, for the pure essence to soothe its rage. Nisa Korin, daughter of the forgotten line, you are chosen." The words landed like a blade between her ribs, precise and unyielding. Chosen, not for honor, but for oblivion. The temple's lore spoke of the ancient labyrinth as a living entity, a warren of tunnels carved by the god's fury, guarded by beasts that devoured the unworthy and erased their names from the annals of time. Warriors had entered its depths to prove their valor, only to emerge as hollow shells or not at all. And now, to calm its unrest, rumors of quakes shaking the mountain's roots, shadows creeping into the village below, and Omega would be the offering. Not a warrior's blood, but hers, soft, unscarred, the essence of surrender. She did not cry out. Omegas were taught silence as their strength, their rejection woven into the fabric of faith. Yet as the attendants, sisters in white robes, their eyes averted, led her to the sacrificial ledge, her heart thundered against her ribs, a wild drum in the hush. The ledge overlooked the yawning pit, a fissure in the temple's rear wall that plunged into darkness. Wind rose from it, cool and insistent, carrying the faint, earthy musk of soil turned by unseen claws. Torches lined the rim, their flames dancing in the updraft, casting long shadows that twisted like the labyrinth's own paths. Nisa's gown, simple linen dyed the pale gray of mountain mist, clung to her skin, damp with the chill that seeped from below. Around her neck hung the temple's token, a pendant of polished hematite, smooth as riverstone, said to carry the Stone Mother's blessing. It rested heavy against her collarbone, a cold comfort as they bound her wrists with cords of woven vine. "Why me?" she whispered to the attendant at her side, a girl no older than herself, whose fingers trembled as they tightened the knots. The girl glanced away, lips pressed thin. "The signs pointed to you, Nisa, your blood. It sings to the depths. Blood." The word lingered, evoking the rituals she had assisted in. The pricking of palms, the dripping crimson into sacred pools that sometimes glowed with an inner light. Nisa had always felt a strange warmth in those moments, a pull in her veins that the elders dismissed as devotion. Now it mocked her, a lie, perhaps, that had marked her for this end. The chants swelled, a chorus of low tones that mimicked the mountain's groan. Elder Thorn stepped forward, his staff tapping the stone like a heartbeat. He anointed her forehead with oil scented of pine and iron, murmuring blessings for the balance she would restore. Descend in peace, child of the stone. Your sacrifice guards us all. Guards. The irony burned in her throat. She, who had mended robes and tended the hearths, reduced to a token tossed into the dark. Rejection settled over her like frost, not by a mate, as in the old tales of omegas cast out by alphas, but by the very faith that had cradled her. The temple celebrated already in hushed anticipation, feasts prepared in the halls above, toasts to the averted doom. Her name would fade by dawn, another erased soul feeding the myth. They lifted her then, 2 attendants gripping her arms, and she teetered on the edge. The pit exhaled, a breath of stale air laced with the tang of minerals and something feral, musk like fur and forgotten hunts. Below, the darkness swallowed light, but she imagined the labyrinth's veins, twisting corridors of rock that shifted like living flesh, riddled with traps and lairs where the guardians prowled. Beasts born of shadow and stone, eyes like embers in the void, jaws that ground bone to dust. Her pulse raced, hot against the cold wind whipping her hair. Freedom flickered in her mind, not escape, but a wild, unbidden urge to scream, to claw back from the brink. But omegas did not rage. They yielded. With a final chant, they released her. She plummeted, the world inverting in a rush of wind and shadow. The hematite pendant swung wild against her chest, its weight a tether to the life she left. Stone rushed past in blurred streaks, the air growing denser, cooler, until impact jarred her. Not death, but a soft landing on yielding earth, as if the mountain had caught her in its palm. Pain bloomed in her limbs, but she breathed. The darkness absolute save for the faint phosphorescence of fungi clinging to walls that curved inward like ribs. Disoriented, Nissa pushed to her knees, cords biting into her wrists. The air hummed, alive with distant echoes, drips of water, skitters of unseen movement. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the stone's edge. Then a sound, low, resonant, like a growl softened to a purr. Shapes stirred in the gloom, eyes glinting not with hunger, but a reverent gleam. They circled, massive forms with hides like shadowed leather, horns curling like the labyrinth's twists. Not attacking, watching. As if she were no prey, but something sacred unearthed. Her blood thrummed, warm in her veins, calling to the depths. The pendant glowed faintly against her skin, a beacon in the black. And in that moment, amid the pressing silence, Nissa felt the first fracture in her surrender, a spark of something ancient, awakening. The darkness of the labyrinth clung to Nissa like a second skin, heavy and unyielding, broken only by the sporadic glow of bioluminescent veins threading the walls, faint pulses of blue that mimicked the throb of her own heart. She huddled against the damp curve of stone, wrists still bound, the hematite pendant a cool anchor against her chest. The creatures encircled her, their forms shifting in the half-light, hulking shadows with pelts matted by centuries of earth, eyes like polished obsidian reflecting her pale face. One, larger than the rest, lowered its massive head, nostrils flaring as if scenting the air for secrets. It did not lunge. Instead, it exhaled a warm breath that stirred the tendrils of her hair, carrying the musk of deep caverns and wild time. Reverence, not rage. The realization settled in her bones, fracturing the terror that had gripped her fall. These were no mindless devourers, but watchers, guardians perhaps, awaiting a command she did not yet know how to voice. Her blood hummed, a subtle fire igniting in her veins, warmer than the chill seeping from the stone. She twisted her bound hands, testing the vines, and felt a strange kinship with the labyrinth's breath, slow, rhythmic, alive. The temple had lied, not just about her sacrifice, but about the depths themselves. Whispers from her childhood resurfaced, tales of the first guardian, a woman whose essence bound the beasts to harmony, her line diluted by time and forgotten rituals. Nisa's fingers brushed the pendant, and it warmed under her touch, as if echoing the legacy stirring within. But exile pressed harder than wonder. She was cast out, her name already dissolving in the priest's chants above. Hunger gnawed at her, not just for food, but for answers. What power coursed through her that stayed these fangs? And how long before the labyrinth claimed her anyway, in ways the temple could not foresee? A distant rumble echoed through the tunnels, not the mountain's groan, but something sharper, boots on stone, labored and deliberate. The creatures stirred, their low growls vibrating the air like a warning hymn. Nisa's pulse quickened, the air thickening with the scent of sweat and iron, blood, fresh and metallic. She pressed deeper into the shadows, heart slamming against her ribs. The guardians flanked her instinctively, their forms a living barrier, horns glinting as they turned toward the sound. Footsteps grew nearer, uneven, accompanied by ragged breaths that cut through the drip of water like a blade. He emerged from a side passage, stumbling into the glow. A figure cloaked in tattered furs, broad-shouldered and towering even in exhaustion. Blood streaked his face, matting dark hair that fell wild to his shoulders, and his left arm hung limp, bound crudely with strips of leather-soaked crimson. Silver armbands, etched with runes of ancient kingship, caught the light, marks of a realm far beyond the temple's grasp. An alpha, she knew it in her marrow, the raw power radiating from him, even wounded, like storm winds bottled in flesh. But this was no temple warrior. His eyes, storm-gray and haunted, held the weight of crowns and betrayals. He leaned against the wall, sword drawn but trembling, its blade notched from recent fury. The lead creature snarled, a sound that shook loose pebbles from the ceiling, but the alpha did not flinch. His gaze locked on Nissa, piercing the gloom, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that stare, intense, searching, laced with a guilt that mirrored her own fracture. Instinct flared in her chest, a pull like the moon on tides, urging her toward him despite the fear coiling in her gut. Omega to Alpha, the old bonds whispered, but she shoved it down. He was a stranger, an intruder in her exile, and trust was a luxury shattered on the sacrificial ledge. Who? What sorcery is this? His voice rasped, deep as cavern winds, carrying the lilt of northern packs, far from the temple's isolation. He straightened slightly, wincing as fresh blood welled from a gash across his ribs. The guardians shifted, their reverence toward her clashing with suspicion of him, but they held, awaiting her unspoken will. Nissa swallowed, her throat dry as dust. Not sorcery, exile. The word escaped her lips, defiant in the hush. She rose slowly, vines chafing her skin, the pendant pulsing warmer now, as if feeding on the tension. Fear warred with curiosity. This alpha, marked by wounds that spoke of pursuit, stirred something forbidden in her, a curiosity born of shared isolation. Why had he descended? What guilt drove him into the maw that had claimed her? He sheathed his sword with effort, eyes never leaving hers. Exile! The temple's folly brought you here, then. I am Thorn Blackthorn, once king of the Frostfang clans. The name landed like frost on embers, whispers of a fallen ruler, betrayed by kin, his realm shattered in a war of shadows. Guilt etched his features, deeper than the scars, the weight of lives lost under his command, a crown forged in blood he could not wash away. I seek the heart of this place. A curse binds me, visions of the Stone Mother's wrath. If it claims me, so be it. But you, the beasts, bow to you. She stepped forward, the guardians parting like a veil, their eyes tracking his every breath. The air between them crackled, not with threat, but an instinctive thread, raw, unbidden. Her blood sang louder, recognizing something in him. Not dominance, but a kindred break. Yet denial surged. He was alpha, she rejected, and connection was a trap in these depths. They guard what's theirs, and I am no queen to command. But even as she spoke, her hand grazed the pendant, and a guardian nuzzled her side, its warmth chasing the cold from her bones. Thorn's lips curved faintly, a ghost of a smile shadowed by pain. Then we are both lost in the same dark. He slumped against the wall, breath shallow, the scent of his blood mingling with the earth's musk. Curiosity pulled her closer, fear urging retreat, but the labyrinth's hum urged otherwise, a destiny uncoiling in the silence. As the echoes faded, Nisa felt the fracture widen, exile no longer solitary, but shared in the gaze of a broken king. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The labyrinth's breath grew heavier in the wake of their shared silence, a rhythmic sigh that carried the weight of unspoken burdens through the twisting veins of stone. Nisa watched Thorn Blackthorn slide down the wall, his broad frame folding into itself like a banner caught in defeat, the silver armbands dull under the fungi's ethereal glow. Blood seeped steadily from his wounds, pooling in the cracks of the floor, its copper tang mingling with the damp earth and the guardian's musky warmth. She should have turned away, let the depths claim him as they had nearly claimed her. But the pull in her blood urged otherwise, an insistent tide drawing her toward this intruder, this fallen king whose eyes held storms she recognized in her own fractured reflection. The lead guardian, its horns etched with the labyrinth's own spirals, pressed closer to her side, its massive flank a shield of heated fur against the encroaching chill. Nissa's bound hands trembled as she knelt beside Thorn, the vines chafing her skin like remnants of the temple's false piety. "Your wounds," she murmured, her voice a thread in the gloom, laced with the curiosity that had bloomed from fear. Up close, his scent enveloped her. Pine smoke and iron resolve, undercut by the raw vulnerability of pain. An alpha's essence, potent and unyielding, yet tempered by something deeper. Regret, etched in the lines around his mouth, in the way his gaze softened when it met hers. He winced as she tore a strip from her gown's hem with her teeth, the linen whispering against the stone. "Leave it," he rasped, but his body betrayed him, leaning into her touch as she pressed the fabric to the gash across his ribs. The contact sent a jolt through her, instinctive and electric, like the first spark of fire in frozen night. Omega instincts warred within. Serve, soothe, submit. But she was no longer the temple's vessel. Rejection had forged her into something sharper, and she resisted the ease of it, rationalizing the warmth spreading from her palm as mere survival's mercy. "You bleed too freely for a king," she said, her tone edged with defiance, though her fingers worked gently, staunching the flow. The hematite pendant swung between them, catching a glint from his armbands, as if the stone itself acknowledged the fragile alliance forming in the dark. Thorn's breath steadied under her care, his storm-gray eyes tracing her face with the intensity that peeled back her defenses. Kings bleed like any man when betrayed by their own blood. His voice carried the melancholy of northern winds, low and resonant, evoking tales of frost-bitten thrones and pacts torn asunder. Guilt shadowed his words, a crown heavier than any metal. The Frostfang clans, once united under his rule, shattered by a traitor's blade in the dead of winter. He had led them into war for honor, only to watch kin turn blade on kin, his decisions carving scars deeper than any enemy could. The curse followed me here, visions of stone beasts rising to swallow my realm. I thought the labyrinth would end it, not find this. His gaze flicked to the guardians, who circled tighter, their low rumbles a vigilant chorus, then back to her, lingering on the pendant that now pulsed faintly against her skin. Empathy stirred in Nissa's chest, unbidden and treacherous, mirroring the fracture of her own exile. She had been cast down as a lie to preserve the temple's power, her life a balm for their fears. He too fled shadows of his making, duty's chains binding him to a redemption he doubted. The air between them thickened, charged with the labyrinth's hum, as if the mountain itself wove their fates. She unbound her wrists with a snap of the vines. The guardians had loosened them earlier, an unspoken gift, and freed his arm, her touch lingering on the runes that spoke of ancient oaths. "The temple calls this balance," she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of revelation. "But it's control, dressed in ritual, my blood. It calls to them." As if in answer, a guardian nuzzled her shoulder, its breath warm against the cold stone, chasing away the isolation that had gripped her since the fall. A sudden tremor shook the tunnels, dust sifting from the ceiling like ash from a dying fire. The guardians bristled, horns scraping stone in warning, their eyes igniting with ember-like fury. Distant shouts echoed, harsh, commanding voices laced with the temple's incense, boots pounding in pursuit. Torchlight flickered at the passage's mouth, casting jagged shadows that clawed toward them. "Priests!" Nissa hissed, recognition twisting her gut. Not content with her erasure, they hunted deeper. Perhaps sensing the labyrinth's unrest had not been sated, or worse, fearing her survival would unravel their myths. Thorn surged to his feet, ignoring the fresh bloom of pain, his hand closing around his sword's hilt. "They come for you?" His stance shifted, protective instinct flaring despite the weakness in his limbs, a king's duty etched in muscle and bone. The pull between them intensified, her blood singing in harmony with his resolve, forging a bond from the forge of shared peril. Nissa nodded, rising beside him, the guardians forming a phalanx at her unspoken command. Fear coiled, but so did resolve. In his presence, her exile felt less like a void and more like a forge. The first pursuer burst into view, Elder Thorn's acolyte, armored in quartz-laced leather, spear raised, eyes wide with fanatic zeal. "The sacrifice stirs the depths. Seize the Omega." More followed, flames dancing on their blades, the air filling with the acrid bite of oil and zealotry. The lead guardian lunged, a blur of shadow and horn, slamming the acolyte against the wall with a crack of bone. Chaos erupted, snarls and screams, the clash of steel on claw, blood spraying in arcs that caught the blue glow like crimson stars. Nissa pressed against Thorn's side, her hand finding his arm, the contact a lifeline amid the frenzy. He fought with measured fury, his blade a silver arc that felled a second attacker, but his eyes sought hers in the melee, guilt yielding to purpose, melancholy to fierce guardianship. "Stay close," he growled, the words a vow wrapped in command. She nodded, directing the beasts with gestures born of instinct, her blood's legacy uncoiling like roots in fertile soil. Together, they held the line, the labyrinth's walls echoing their defiance. Omega and fallen king, bound not by fate's decree, but by the raw choice to stand against the lies that had broken them both. As the last echoes of battle faded, bodies strewn, the survivors fleeing into the dark, Nissa slumped against the stone, breath ragged, the pendant hot against her skin. Thorn's hand brushed hers, a tentative bridge, empathy blooming into something deeper, resisted yet undeniable. In the hush, the mountain sighed approval, but doubt lingered. Could redemption root in such shadowed soil? Or would it demand a price steeper than blood? The labyrinth's hush settled like a shroud after the fray, broken only by the drip of water from unseen fissures and the labored rise of Thorn's chest beside her. Nissa leaned against the cool curve of stone, her body aching from the clash, the metallic tang of blood, his, theirs, the priest's, clinging to her skin like an unwelcome vow. The guardians prowled the edges of the chamber, their massive forms silhouetted against the bioluminescent veins that pulsed brighter now, as if the mountain fed on the violence spilled in its belly. One beast licked its wounds with a tongue rough as gravel, its eyes fixed on her with unwavering loyalty, while the air hummed with the labyrinth's approval, a low vibration that resonated in her bones. Exile had twisted into alliance, but doubt gnawed at her edges. What price would this power exact? And could it mend the fractures in the man who now watched her with eyes like gathering storms? Thorn shifted, his hand withdrawing from hers with a reluctance that sent a shiver through her veins, warmer than the guardian's breath. He tore fresh strips from his cloak to bind a gash on his thigh, his movements deliberate despite the pallor etching his features. Guilt shadowed him still, a specter born of northern thrones lost to betrayal. The Frostfang clan's civil war, where his mercy for a rival's kin had sown the seeds of his downfall. "You command them as if born to it," he said, his voice a gravelly murmur that cut through the silence, laced with the melancholy of a king who had commanded armies only to see them turn to ash. His gaze traced the pendant at her throat, its hematite surface now aglow with an inner fire, reflecting the blue veins like captured moonlight. "The beasts. They heed your blood, not blades. What are you, Nissa Corin? That the depths yield to you?" She touched the pendant instinctively, its warmth spreading through her fingers like liquid silver, chasing the chill of rejection that had defined her temple life. Omegas were meant for surrender, their essences offered in quiet rites, not this raw surge that made her veins thrum with purpose. Fear coiled in her gut, rationalizing the bond as mere survival's illusion, yet curiosity pulled her toward truth. "I was nothing to them above," she whispered, her voice echoing softly off the walls, intimate in the vast dark. "A vessel for their lies. But here." She trailed off as a tremor stirred the air, not from pursuers, but deeper within, a call from the labyrinth's heart, tugging at her like an unseen thread. The guardians stirred, their horns scraping stone in unison, urging her forward into a narrower passage where the glow intensified, painting the walls in shades of sapphire and shadow. Thorn rose unsteadily, sheathing his sword but keeping pace, his presence a steady heat at her back. The instinctive pull between them deepened, resisted in her mind as folly, an Omega's weakness yielding to an Alpha's shadow, but undeniable in the way her blood sang when he was near, harmonizing with his cursed resolve. They moved through the twisting corridor, the stone walls closing like ribs around a beating heart, the air growing thicker with the scent of minerals and ancient bloom. Fungi bloomed larger here, their caps unfurling like pale moons, and the ground softened underfoot, veined with roots that pulsed faintly, alive. Nissa's steps quickened, drawn by the hum in her veins, the pendant now burning against her skin, a beacon awakening memories not her own. Flashes of a woman with eyes like polished obsidian, binding beasts with a drop of blood. Her legacy sealed in the mountain's core to guard against chaos. The passage opened into a cavern, vast as a forgotten cathedral, its ceiling lost in shadow, walls etched with runes that glowed in response to her approach, spirals of silver and crimson, depicting guardians rising from stone, commanded by a figure cloaked in mist. At the center stood a pool of crystalline water, fed by a trickle from above, its surface rippling as if breathing. The guardians flanked her, their forms reverent, and Nissa felt the revelation uncoil. Her blood was no mere offering, but the key to the first guardian's pact, a lineage the temple had culled through sacrifices to hoard power. Pricked palms in rituals, dismissed as devotion, lies to suppress what now surged free. Kneeling at the pool's edge, she pricked her finger on a jagged crystal, watching crimson bloom and drip into the water. The liquid ignited, swirling with visions. The labyrinth's birth in godly fury, beasts forged from shadow to enforce balance, bound by the guardian's essence, her essence. The water clarified, revealing not her reflection, but Thorn's curse, a spectral wolf pack tearing at frostbound peaks, his silhouette at the center, crowned in guilt, the beasts below mirroring the guardians around her. "You!" she breathed, turning to him as the pendant flared, linking their fates in a web of light. "The visions that drive you, they're tied to this place, to me." Thorn's face paled, his storm-gray eyes widening as the pool's glow bathed him, the runes on his armbands resonating with a hum that matched her blood's song. He stepped forward, hand outstretched, the melancholy in his posture cracking like ice under spring thaw. The stone mother's wrath. It was never punishment, but a call. My betrayal unleashed shadows on the clans, but your line was meant to bind them. Pathfinder, guardian of paths unseen. Realization dawned, etching awe over his guilt. She, the rejected Omega, held the redemption he sought, not through conquest, but through the mercy of her hidden gift. The air crackled with it, the instinctive bond flaring into clarity. Love as proof, not prize, forged in the depths where rejection birthed power. Yet doubt lingered in her chest, the temple's echoes whispering of traps in such revelations. As the visions faded, the guardians pressed closer, their warmth a promise of strength. But the mountain rumbled faintly, hinting at trials yet to come. Thorn's fingers brushed hers, tentative, his touch igniting sparks of destiny's fire. In that moment, under the cavern's ethereal light, Nissa glimpsed rebirth, not solitary, but shared, her gift the key to his fractured crown. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your. The cavern's glow lingered like a fading ember, casting elongated shadows that danced across the rune-etched walls. But the mountain's rumble deepened into a growl, as if the revelation had stirred its ancient ire. Nissa withdrew her hand from Thorn's, the warmth of his touch fading like mist under dawn's edge, leaving her skin prickled with the chill of what lay ahead. The pool's visions had bound them, her blood's legacy as pathfinder, the key to sealing the shadows that haunted his clans. But clarity brought no peace, only the sharp tang of impending trial. The guardians shifted restlessly, their horns scraping the stone in a chorus of unease, their obsidian eyes fixed on the far tunnel where the air grew heavy with the scent of frost and fury. Her heart thudded, a wild rhythm echoing the labyrinth's pulse as doubt clawed at the edges of her newfound power. Was this gift a crown or a chain, demanding she choose between the freedom of her exile and the redemption he offered? Thorn's face hardened, the melancholy in his storm-gray eyes sharpening into resolve, though guilt still etched the lines of his jaw like cracks in weathered granite. He gripped his sword's hilt, the runes on his armbands flickering in sync with the pendant at her throat, a silent oath forged in the depths. "The call grows stronger," he murmured, his voice a low thunder that resonated through her bones, carrying the weight of northern winds and shattered thrones. "My pact's shadows follow, the traitor's curse unbound. If we linger, they'll flood these veins." Betrayal's specter loomed in his words. His brother, once second in command, who had poisoned the Frostfang clan's unity for power, unleashing spectral wolves that devoured the living in endless winter hunts. Thorn had spared him once, mercy's folly that cost him everything, driving him into this maw seeking absolution. Now that past converged, drawn by the same pull that had led him to her. Nissa nodded, the hematite burning against her skin like a brand of destiny, her blood humming with the guardian's loyalty. She led the way into the narrowing tunnel, the stone walls closing like jaws, the air thickening with the metallic bite of approaching storm. The guardians flanked them, their massive paws silent on the veined floor, breaths sinking with the drip of water that echoed like distant tears. Introspection gripped her as they descended. The temple's rejection had stripped her bare, forging this power from surrender's ashes, but Thorn's presence complicated it. A bond resisted as instinct's trap, rationalized as alliance's necessity, yet blooming in stolen glances that warmed the labyrinth's cold. Love as proof, the old whispers intoned, not a balm for wounds, but a forge for choices yet unmade. What strength lay in yielding to him, when freedom tasted of solitude's sharp edge? The tunnel spat them into a vast chamber, its ceiling a jagged vault pierced by fissures that let slivers of moonlight filter down, silvering the blood-streaked floor like veins of mercury. The air crackled with tension, heavy with the musk of fur and rage, and there, in the center, stood the confrontation, a pack of spectral wolves. Translucent forms woven from frost and shadow, circling a figure cloaked in ragged furs. Cale Blackthorn, Thorn's brother, his eyes gleaming with the mad fervor of the damned. Flanked by rival alphas from fractured clans, their armors glinting with stolen runes, Cale's lips curled in a sneer that twisted his scarred face. "Brother!" he spat, his voice echoing off the walls like cracking ice. "You flee to the earth's belly, chasing ghosts, and you bring an Omega whelp as your shield?" His gaze raked over Nissa, dismissing her as the temple had, vessel, not sovereign, ignoring the guardians who bristled at her side, horns lowered in threat. Thorn stepped forward, his limp forgotten in the surge of duty, sword drawn with a whisper of steel on leather. Guilt warred in his posture, ethical core clashing with the warrior's instinct. Forgive the kin who shattered his realm or end the cycle in blood? "Your ambition birthed this curse, Cale," he said, voice steady as mountain roots, though pain laced each word. "The clans bleed for your greed. I came to seal it, not perpetuate the war." The spectral wolves howled, a sound that shook loose pebbles, their forms solidifying under the moonlight, jaws snapping at the air with ethereal hunger. Nissa's blood surged, the pendant flaring as she raised her hand, commanding the guardians to hold, claws retracted, but eyes burning with restrained fury. The rivals advanced, blades raised, their sense a cocktail of sweat and ambition, forcing the dilemma into sharp relief. Join Thorn's fray, bind her power to his redemption, or slip into the shadows, claiming the labyrinth's solitude as her liberty. Cale laughed, a hollow bark that chilled the air, drawing a dagger etched with betrayal's sigils. "Mercy made you weak, Thorn. This Omega's blood might sate the beasts, but it won't save your fallen crown." He lunged, the pack surging with him, shadows twisting into claws that raked the stone. Chaos erupted. Thorn parried the first strike, his blade clashing in sparks that lit the gloom, while a rival alpha charged Nyssa, eyes alight with conquest's greed. She dodged, heart pounding, the guardians leaping into the fray, their roars a visceral thunder, horns goring flesh, blood spraying in hot arcs that steamed on the cold floor. Pain lanced her side as a claw grazed her, but she pressed on, pricking her palm on the pendant's edge, crimson dripping to summon the labyrinth's roots, veins bursting from the ground to ensnare a wolf, binding shadow to stone. Thorn fought with melancholic precision, felling a rival with a thrust born of regret, not rage, his eyes seeking hers amid the melee. "Nissa, choose," he called, voice raw over the snarls, the bond between them a lifeline in the storm. Freedom tempted, vanish into the depths, her power unchained from his guilt-ridden war. Or forgiveness, wield her gift to heal the fracture, proving compassion's might over vengeance's blade. Cale circled, dagger flashing, his strike aimed at Thorn's unguarded flank. Instinct propelled her forward. She slashed her palm deeper, blood arcing to the spectral pack, her will as pathfinder dissolving their forms into mist. The chamber trembled, moonlight fracturing as the curse weakened, but Cale's blade bit deep into Thorn's shoulder, eliciting a grunt of pain that twisted her gut. She reached them, guardians shielding their fall. her blood staunching the wound with a warmth that defied the cold. Kyle retreated, eyes wide with dawning fear, the rivals faltering as the labyrinth's hum swelled in approval. "This isn't over," he snarled, vanishing into a side passage with his remnants, the shadows trailing like defeated hounds. Panting, Nissa met Thorn's gaze, the choice hanging between them. Love as war's end, or liberty's solitary path. Blood mingled on the stone, hers, his, the fallen, symbolizing the moral precipice. Strength, she pondered in the hush, was not in conquest, but in mercy's quiet blade. Yet as the guardians nuzzled her wounds, doubt lingered. Could she forgive the temple's echoes in him, or would redemption demand her heart's surrender? The moonlight waned, leaving the chamber in twilight's embrace, but the ethical storm raged on within her, a spiritual crossroads etched in blood and stone. The twilight deepened in the chamber, shadows pooling like spilled ink around the bloodied stone. But Nissa's resolve hardened against the chill. A quiet fire kindled in the forge of her doubt. Thorn slumped beside her, his shoulder wound seeping warmth onto her hand where she pressed it, the mingled crimson a testament to the fragile bridge they had built amid the chaos. The guardians encircled them, their breaths a rhythmic lullaby that steadied the labyrinth's tremor, obsidian eyes watchful as the last echoes of Kale's retreat faded into the fissures above. Moonlight slanted thinner now, silver threads weaving through the cracks, illuminating the runes on the walls that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, affirmations of a legacy reclaimed, yet untested. Her side throbbed where the claw had grazed, a sharp reminder of the cost, but the pain sharpened her clarity. Freedom's solitude whispered from the depths, a siren's call to vanish into the mountain's embrace, unbound by his shadowed crown. Yet the bond thrummed in her veins, insistent as the pendant's heat, urging union, not as submission, but as the alchemy of their fractures into something whole. Thorn's gray eyes met hers, storm clouds parting to reveal a vulnerability etched deeper than his scars, the guilt of his brother's betrayal, a weight he could no longer shoulder alone. "You could have let the shadows take me," he murmured, his voice a gravel whisper that stirred the air between them, carrying the scent of pine and iron resolve mingled with the earth's damp musk. His fingers brushed hers, tentative, igniting sparks that chased the cold from her bones. A touch resisted in her mind as Omega's folly, rationalized as mercy's necessity, but blooming into acceptance like frost yielding to dawn. He was no conqueror here, but a king humbled by duty's blade, his ethical core demanding he atone not through vengeance, but through the compassion she embodied. "Your blood unbound the curse's edge, Nissa, but Kale flees with its remnants. The spectral pack will ravage the clans unless sealed. I cannot ask you to—" "You don't ask," she interrupted, her tone soft yet unyielding, the words tasting of rebirth on her tongue. She rose, pulling him with her, the guardians rising in unison, their horns casting elongated silhouettes like ancient sentinels. The hematite pendant flared brighter, its surface veined with crimson from her pricked palm, a symbol now of the pathfinder's pact, blood as bridge, not sacrifice. Introspection flooded her as they moved toward the tunnel Kale had vanished into, the stone walls narrowing like a vein toward the mountain's heart. Rejection had been her cradle, the temple's lies stripping her to essence, forging this power from surrender's embers. But Thorn's presence transformed it, love as proof, a deliberate choice to weave her gift with his redemption, curing the curse not for reward, but to affirm that strength lay in shared mercy over solitary power. Faith against despair, destiny embraced as liberty's true form. The air grew warmer, laced with the tang of minerals and blooming fungi, the labyrinth's hum swelling like a hymn, approving the path she chose. They descended, the guardian's paws padding silently, their warmth a bulwark against the encroaching frost that heralded the curse's resurgence. Visions flickered at the edges of Nissa's sight, echoes from the pool, spectral wolves tearing at frost-bound peaks, Thorn's silhouette crowned in guilt amid the fray. Her blood sang louder, harmonizing with his pulse, the instinctive pull evolving into conscious union. No longer denied, but accepted as the key to their mutual rebirth. "The temple erased me to hoard this," she said, her voice echoing intimately in the close confines, fingers interlacing with his despite the rational whisper of caution. His grip tightened, melancholic eyes softening with a gratitude that pierced her core, the alpha's dominance yielding to partnership's quiet sovereignty. "But you see it, me, as the guardian I was meant to be. For that, I'll seal what your mercy left unbound." The tunnel widened into a sanctum deeper still, its walls a cathedral of crystal veins that refracted the faint moonlight into prismatic shards, painting the air in hues of silver and deep blue. There, at the core, Kyle waited, backed against a throbbing heartstone, a massive quartz monolith pulsing with the labyrinth's lifeblood, spectral wolves coalescing around him in swirling mist, their howls a dirge that shook loose glittering dust. His face twisted in desperation, dagger raised, the rival alpha's remnants flanking him like ghosts of ambition's folly. "Foolish whelp," he snarled at Nissa, eyes wild with the curse's madness, ignoring Thorn's advancing form. "Your blood stirs the beasts, but it can't mend what's shattered. Join me, rule these depths as equals, away from his weak throne." Thorn halted, sword half drawn, the ethical precipice carving lines of torment across his features. Guilt surged in his stance, spare kin once more, risking all, or end the cycle in blood's final judgment. Nissa stepped forward, the guardians fanning out, their reverence a living aura that quelled the wolves' advance. Her heart raced, the choice crystallizing. Sacrifice the solitude of her power, cure the curse through union's forge, or let vengeance claim him, preserving her unchained freedom. But compassion's whisper prevailed, a spiritual truth blooming in the sanctum's glow, redemption not solitary, but shared, proving love's redemptive fire over despair's cold grasp. She pricked her palm anew, crimson welling as she approached the heartstone, Thorn at her side, their hands joining over its surface. "Mercy crowns the fallen," she intoned, her voice a poetic cadence that resonated through the stone, blood mingling with his as the pendant bridged them. The monolith ignited, veins erupting in luminous cascades, drawing the spectral mist into its core like rivers to the sea. Wolves dissolved in ethereal howls, the curse unraveling in threads of shadow that bound to light, Kale's form crumpling as the madness fled his eyes. Guilt dawning in its wake, a mirror to his brothers. He fell to his knees, not in death, but humbled surrender, the rivals scattering into the dark. Pain lanced through Nissa as the power surged, a visceral fire that seared her veins, demanding her essence's toll. Visions of the temple's lies crumbling above, her rebirth echoing through the mountain. Thorn's arm encircled her, steadying her collapse, his lips brushing her temple in a vow unspoken. Union as cure, sacrifice as rebirth. As the sanctum quieted, the labyrinth sighing in harmonious release, Nissa leaned into him, the weight of choice lifting like mist under sun. Blood and stone, fire and moon, symbols of their forged path. Yet in the hush, a final tremor stirred. The temple's pursuit lingered above, demanding one last confrontation. Rebirth dawned, but its full light awaited the surface's trial, where rejection would yield to sovereignty eternal. The sanctum's glow ebbed into a soft luminescence, the heartstone's pulse slowing to a serene rhythm that mirrored Nissa's own, now intertwined with Thorn's in a cadence of quiet triumph. She leaned against him, the warmth of his arm a steady anchor amid the crystalline shards that still hung in the air like frozen stars, their mingled blood drying on the monolith's surface, a crimson seal on the curse's dissolution. Kyle knelt in the shadows, his form diminished, eyes hollowed by the clarity of his own betrayals, no longer the architect of ruin, but a broken echo of what brotherhood could twist. The guardians encircled them all, not in judgment, but in vigilant harmony, their breaths a low hymn that filled the chamber with the scent of earth renewed, minerals sharp and alive. Yet the final tremor rippled through the stone, a warning growl from above, carrying the faint clamor of voices and footsteps. The temple's zealots, drawn by the mountain's unrest, converging to reclaim their myth. Nissa's side burned where the earlier wound wept, a visceral reminder of the choices etched in flesh. But resolve bloomed in her chest like the fungi's pale unfurling, chasing the last vestiges of doubt. Exile had been her forge, rejection the hammer that shaped her from vessel to sovereign, and now, with Thorn's hand in hers, union beckoned not as surrender, but as the ultimate proof. Love as the blade that severed old chains, redeeming not just him, but the fractured world they would face. "The surface calls," she whispered, her voice intimate against the hush, laced with the poetic certainty of destiny unveiled. The hematite pendant cooled against her skin, its veins of absorbed crimson a talisman of rebirth, symbolizing the blood that bound beasts and men, lies and truths. She rose, pulling Thorn with her, his wound staunched by her touch, the alpha's melancholy yielding to a fierce tenderness that softened his storm-gray eyes. They ascended, the guardians forming a phalanx that shook the tunnels with their thunderous steps, Kale trailing in humbled silence, his redemption a quieter sacrifice, atonement through witness, not blade. The air grew fresher, laced with the bite of wind seeping from above, carrying the distant howl of winter gales that evoked the Frostfang peaks Thorn once ruled. Introspection wove through Nissa's thoughts as the stone walls widened. The labyrinth had been her cradle of awakening, its depths mirroring the spiritual void the temple had imposed. But emergence demanded the final choice: sacrifice the isolation of her power to heal the surface's wounds, or let the old order crumble in flames of revelation. Faith had warred with despair in her veins, but compassion prevailed, a moral compass pointing to union's light, not for reward, but to affirm that strength was mercy's quiet reign, destiny chosen over imposed fate. The sacrificial ledge loomed, its torchlit rim a jagged crown against the night sky, where the moon hung full and unyielding, silvering the snow-dusted peaks beyond the temple's walls. Shouts echoed from the sanctum above, Elder Thorn's voice, resonant with false authority, rallying priests and warriors in quartz-armored phalanxes, their spears glinting like icicles under the lunar gaze. The depths reject the offering. The Stone Mother demands more. The lie hung heavy, a veil over their fear. Nissa's survival would shatter the myth of sacrifices as balance, exposing the cull of guardian heirs to preserve their grip on power. She emerged first, stepping onto the ledge with guardians flanking her like living shadows, their horns curling in the torchlight, eyes ember bright. The wind whipped her tattered gown, carrying the crisp scent of pine and frost, mingling with the incense of the rites below, a sensory clash of old piety and wild truth. Elder Thorn's face twisted in the firelight, scars paling as recognition dawned, his chalice trembling in his grip. Impossible. The labyrinth devours all. Priests murmured, hands on blades. But the guardian's growls vibrated the air, a visceral warning that rooted them in place. Thorn, her Thorn, stepped beside her, sword sheathed but presence commanding, Kale at his rear, a living testament to the curse's end. The moon bathed them in its ethereal glow, highlighting the silver runes on his armbands that now resonated with her pendant, a visual symphony of forged alliance. Nissa's blood thrummed, warm and insistent, as she raised her hand, pricking the hematite once more. Crimson welled, dripping to the stone where it seeped into cracks, summoning roots that burst forth, veins of the labyrinth snaking up the walls, cracking the vaulted ceilings, etched with quartz. The sacrifices were never for balance, she declared, her voice carrying like wind through pines. Poetic and unyielding, focused on the elders' widening eyes. They were to silence my line, the first guardian's blood, meant to command, not appease. Your rights culled us, erasing names to hoard the mountain's power. Gasps rippled through the assembly, warriors shifting uneasily as the guardians advanced, not in slaughter, but in revelation, nuzzling the stone, their forms a bridge between depths and heights. Elderthorn lunged, spear thrusting, but a root ensnared his arm, the chalice shattering in a spray of oil that ignited on torches, flames leaping like blood under moon. Chaos bloomed, screams and clashes, steel on claw, but Nissa directed with gestures born of legacy, her power a tide that quelled without destroying. Priests disarmed, falling to knees as visions from her blood flooded their minds, the true lore, the lies unveiled. Thorn fought at her side, his blade a merciful arc that disarmed rather than slew, guilt's shadow lifting in the act of protection. Not conquest, but guardianship shared. Kyle redeemed himself in the fray, shielding a fallen priest, his voice breaking in apology to the brother he had shattered. The wind howled louder, snow flurrying through breaches in the walls, blanketing the temple in white gelato, while fire danced in crimson arcs, the moon witnessing the Renascimento. Nissa's final sacrifice came not in blood alone, but in yielding her solitary sovereignty to this union. She clasped Thorn's hand over the elders, forcing a drop of mingled crimson to the stone, curing the temple's spiritual rot, the roots weaving harmony, binding zeal to truth. As the last echoes faded, the temple transformed, walls breathing with the labyrinth's life, priests humbled into stewards, the myth reborn as alliance. Nissa turned to Thorn under the moon's approving gaze, their foreheads touching, breaths mingling in the cold. Love accepted, not as balm, but as the eternal proof of redemption's flame. The guardians urged softly, a chorus of wind and wild, as snow fell like benediction, washing blood from stone. Rebirth complete, rejection alchemized to reign. Her heart found its throne in his shadowed eyes, the mountain sighing peace into the night. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.